Good evening. This is Redwood Wonk. I'm with Dave Frank. My name is Eric Kirk. We are here to talk national news of the day. The first topic is, well, what's making headlines? The Voters' Rights Act. The two bills in Congress. The Democrats want to push it through. Republicans dead set against it. President Biden made a big speech yesterday. Republicans are calling it an incoherent rant. Even Senator Durbin is thinking that some of the rhetoric making comparisons to George Wallace was overblown. But others are saying, this is the time to push. The Democrats are, of course, worried about the two senators who have blocked a lot so far, Sinema and Manchin. They are in huddling. They are in mammoth meetings with those two. Senator Tester says there isn't a lot of progress so far. They're developing a strategy, though. They want to pass these two bills, the John Lewis Act, and then also the act that Manchin himself put forth, hoping that there would be Republican support. But Republicans immediately threw cold water on it. I think the Democrats are putting forth saying, look, are you going to support your own bill or what? And Manchin so far has said that he doesn't want to eliminate or even weaken the filibuster for such things as voting rights, but Democrats are really pushing this hard, and they're talking about rules changes, and they have come up with a unique. Well, I don't know if it's unique. Maybe it's been done before, but they've come up with a strategy to at least get it on the floor because they want to, at minimum, embarrass people who would not let this thing pass through. We're talking about voting rights in terms of trying to undo gerrymandering, trying to overturn or basically pass a law that will reinstate some of the policies that the Supreme Court had come up with around the Voting Rights Act before, that the Supreme Court had pretty much dissolved almost a decade ago. They want to establish national standards for early voting. They would like to come up with some type of national control over campaign finances that might survive constitutional muster even under the Supreme Court. And a number of other reforms, and they want to do it before this midterm election because they feel like if they can actually have fair elections, that they may have a chance in this and ongoing elections. This is their battle right now. Dave?
Yes, it's a really interesting time, and this really compressed calendar. So there was, I believe it to be the case that President Biden had laid down the timeline, or him in conjunction with Senator Schumer, that Martin Luther King Jr. holiday coming up on the 17th would be kind of like a line in the sand, that we're gonna force a vote so that people really need to come down on whether or not they want to support and endorse the two proposals, like you mentioned, the Freedom to Vote Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Amendment Act. And like you said, one is to enrich and enhance a robust access to the polls. Lots of small changes that have been getting put in place by the Republican legislatures around the country. This is to kind of combat that. It does nationalize it, but it's like a floor. It's like a minimum standard of access, but it's aspirational. So that's why it seems to be so important to Democrats, but also to, I think for the country in general, to kind of defend this. And the John Lewis Voting Rights Act is the one that the Department of Justice has got used to review the former Confederate states whenever they made a change to their voting laws, and the Supreme Court threw that out. And so this is to kind of reinstate that oversight, because it's, look, now there's all these changes that are being put in place. So that's the technical what's at stake. Interestingly, the Schumer strategy, which it's new to me, it might not be new to other insiders, but it's called messaging. And so they're going to attack that. What's going to happen is tomorrow, and this is what they're projecting. Tomorrow, Nancy Pelosi and the House of Representatives are going to pass both of these bills. inside of the NASA funding bill, which is, I think, is going to extend the funding for like 10 years. And they're going to put a message on it. It's called messaging. And so the message is pass these bills or something like that. And then because the Senate has already debated the NASA funding bill before, then, a Democrat in the Senate is going to bring it up and say, hey, we need to talk about the messaging in the NASA bill.
Therefore, bypassing the filibuster because they don't have to open debate. It's already been open. It's been open for months, apparently.
Yes. So it seems like a trick, but it could work. And then that would allow them, of course, if they need 60 votes to end debate. So they wouldn't be able to pass the bill without either 10 Republicans supporting it, which won't happen, or some strong arming happens over this weekend and both Manchin and Sinema agree to the filibuster reform, some small filibuster reform, either the talking filibuster, which seems to be getting some support, or the carve out for voting rights, which does not seem to be getting some support. And really, this is to shame Manchin and Sinema into not being a part and parcel of blocking such significant civil rights legislation.
And they may even try to time it on the Martin Luther King holiday.
They're going to do that. That's what they're projecting.
So that Manchin and particularly Sinema have to do this. And there's a history in Arizona because actually it was McCain himself who was the last senator to oppose the Martin Luther King holiday because Arizona back then was really reactionary. And that is not something that she wants to carry into any type of reelection bid, as having opposed voting rights on Martin Luther King holiday. Now, some Democrats, some moderate Democrats may be complaining about his rhetoric, but Biden's rhetoric is very specifically tailored towards this. He's not messing around. He's bringing up Governor Wallace for a reason. You side with Martin Luther King or Governor Wallace. There's no middle ground here.
And yeah, you're alluding to or referencing the speech that he gave down in Georgia, I think, yes, where he really did lay it all out there. And so you take the president at his word that this is a first principle priority for him. But just because we're a wonk show, let's talk wonk. Like this is about power, but it's also about influence. When it comes to influence, that's the gambit here. Is that can they influence Can they influence Manchin and Sinema or not? Because this is not a power move. Because in order to get this to work, Manchin and Sinema have to agree. It takes 50 votes to start talking about the NASA bill. So if Manchin is really and truly, the evil genius that the Rolling Stone magazine recently referred to him as, I think, basically, then in fact he could just not agree to let the NASA bill be debated, and then therefore all of this would be silenced.
But he'll look really bad if he does that because he's already said that he's open to removing the filibuster to prevent debate. He wants to preserve the filibuster on the closing end, but he's already said he's open to allowing the debate. And if he shuts it down at this point, I mean, he just he'll lose all credibility. He has been in discussion. Now, of course, he was in discussion with Build Back Better for hours and hours and hours before, too. So he's in discussion. Biden went and had lunch and debated with everybody. He also showed up to McConnell's office. Apparently, McConnell made sure he was out of there before Biden showed up. It was really kind of interesting. I mean, Biden's really playing up the theater right now, putting the pressure on everybody. So I think that Manchin, if he did that, he would just lose all credibility and nobody would do that. I think he's got to allow that to happen and do that. I mean, if there would just be nothing left. No Democrat would want to work with him. They'd just say, go ahead and switch parties. I mean, at that point, because there's just no point in doing that. But it means that he gets embarrassed on King Day as well. And
So last week in my prediction, I thought that the carve out was a more elegant and simple and quick way that they could just say, you know what, this is civil rights and we need to prioritize civil rights and voting. Where do we stand if we all can't vote? That's what democracy is all about. So I could sort of logically I could see where they would Manchin and Sinema might just give an inch on the civil rights side, it's a much bigger adaptation of Senate rules and to actually start to change procedures. So we'll see. It's going to be they're going to be here all weekend, I think, and it's
We'll
going to really hit the floor on Monday.
They haven't budged on it so far.
We saw with our own eyes. Rioters menaced these halls, threatening the life of the Speaker of the House, literally erecting gallows to hang the Vice President of the United States of America. What did we not see? We didn't see a former president who had just rallied the mob to attack, sitting in the private dining room off the Oval Office in the White House, watching it all on television and doing nothing.
He said that the goal of some Republicans is to, quote, turn the will of the voters into a mere suggestion. And so President Biden goes down the same tragic road taken by President Trump, casting doubt on the reliability of American elections.
State the obvious. 1 year ago today, in this sacred place, democracy was attacked. For the first time in our history, the president had not just lost an election, he tried to prevent the peaceful transfer of power.
Okay, the Republicans, while there is the element that still thinks that Trump is the big hero, the numbers do seem to be declining. He hasn't been getting people showing up to his rallies as much. Who knows whether or not that is an actual decline. We'll talk about that in the next segment of his support. But the rising star, at least according to some pundits, and the anticipation is that DeSantis will be the standard bearer and run for president in 2024. DeSantis is the governor of Florida. He has been doing very well. He's expected to win re-election this coming year in Florida. He is his ratings have been very high. He has gotten himself into a little bit of trouble lately. You know, he for a while the ratings of the infection rate was lower, one of the lowest in the country. But that fluctuates. This pandemic can be very confusing and doesn't doesn't always play ball the way we want. It's now one of the fastest rising infection rates, but Omicron works all different kinds of ways. A little bit of a controversy too. He let somewhere between 800,000 and 1 million tests basically pass their expiration times. He's pretty much admitted it. He's not really into all that much into testing. He really wants to downplay the stuff. And then Trump attacked him today because apparently he has been boosted, but he won't tell people that because he wants to play to the anti-vax crowd, but also wants to have it both ways. He has been a supporter of Trump, but also, and sort of played it both ways with the big lie, hasn't really taken a big stand on it. Big question everybody is kind of watching is, will he break away from Trump? And is he the star? Is he the one to run against Biden or whoever the Democrats put up in 2024?
Yeah, and so we'll see how this goes. Right now, I would say that it's too soon to tell. But DeSantis has been separating, I would say, from Trump because he's arguably first in line to be that challenger. And so they have a common interest, I think, in sort of defending the January 6th Capitol events. So DeSantis is kind of walking a tightrope here. And basically what he's saying is that by calling it an insurrection, by celebrating it or commemorizing it the way that happened last week, that this is really a smear against all Republicans. So in a way, he's doing that party building that we talked about for the last year, I guess, since last year around this time, that Republicans are kind of circling the wagons. And you look at McCarthy, the minority leader in the House, and he's, there's been a lot of commentators speaking about him, saying that you need to be, the Republicans are behaving very resiliently by there's no need for them to be consistent. There's no need for them to be rational. There's no need for them to really buy into what Democrats are saying. They just got to stick together. And so I think DeSantis, that's kind of what he's been doing, is he's been trying to say, hey, look, there's a red state. We're role models here. And any people who are politicizing January 6th. He called it a politicized foxtrot, and he said watching it on TV is nauseating. Like any kind of media coverage of this is nauseating. So he's still trying to, for lack of a better word, he's calling it the higher. He thinks it's the high ground for Republicans instead of doing attacking Trump in his lowest moment here.
Yeah. Now, his opponent, he does, before he runs for president, he has to win re-election as governor, and he's looking good for that right now. His opponent is Charlie Crist, who is a former Republican governor, by the way, switched parties. He's now representing Florida's 13th congressional district, and he looks to be the standard bearer for the Democrats. Kind of a moderate guy. Does he have a chance? Who knows? But if he is a Democratic Party player at this point, they probably want him not so much to win, but to take him down a few notches. So, in the campaign, is he a player for the Democrats now in that way? And will they, reward him in some way as a leader in the party for doing that? If he doesn't, and how does he play that role? Who knows? But he is a leader, and he is, does have gravitas and could do that in the debates and in the campaign. Again, it's early in the campaign. It's early, long time from 2024. But, these mistakes that DeSantis is making, particularly with COVID, they're not going to go unmentioned.
Right.
And other things as well. The inconsistencies with Trump aren't going to go unmentioned.
Right.
It's so things are going to happen, and if the goal isn't necessarily to even defeat DeSantis, but to take the shine from his his appearance. That I imagine if the Democrats are concerned about him from 2024, that will be the strategy of the Crist campaign.
And so there's also, like you said, DeSantis has to face a challenge for governor right now, going before, sorry, not right now, but before the 2024 cycle. So it's 2022 cycle. And it appears that, that he's going to take a lot of hits for this tightrope that he's walking. He'll probably take some hits from Republicans for not being close enough to Trump, like you said, but also, this, all the stuff related to COVID, all the stuff related to January 6th. So it's pretty. He knows his state though. I have a family in Florida. I talk to people in Florida, and surprisingly popular governor. So he's got his finger on the pulse. They really did want him to go this way when it comes to COVID response. Yes. Not everybody, of course, but a majority certainly. And like you said, Crist was former governor, current senator, right?
He's congressman.
Congressman, sorry. He's gone both ways too. Like he's been elected as a Republican and elected as a Democrat. So Florida really is one of those middle of the road states that might very well be a bellwether for the 2024 cycle.
Yeah, no, it may very well be, and it's one that Democrats have a really hard time organizing in. I mean, for whatever reason, it's not even just that it's kind of a conservative, a reddish purple state. The Democratic Party there is just terribly organized. They've got some actually decent candidates, but they just can't pull it together over the past, 20 years, actually. I mean, it's just really pathetic. But, they've got this issue. But again, if they stay focused on that, they got Val Deming running against, I'm forgetting the senator, this time around. Also,
Rubio. We're talking about Rubio.
Marco Rubio. Thank you. And again, these are uphill battles, but you got to have somebody in there to debate. You got to think long term. You got to think, the long ground game there. And so, at any rate, you got to really just look for the mistakes, and you just got to, be there to make the arguments. And yes, but the big key again for all of the elections this time around is going to be how strongly is Trump going to push Republican candidates on the big lie issue. In his interview, in the NPR interview that maybe we'll talk about at a certain point, he did this finally after years agreed to do a 15-minute interview with NPR. Only got 9 minutes before he hung up on him, and kept pushing the big lie. And he said, well, they'll do what they have to do. So it sounds like maybe he'll allow some of them to kind of wiggle out of it. I don't know. We'll see. But he definitely, as he was being pushed on certain keys, the big lie just hung up abruptly. The reporter was asking a question and didn't even realize he'd been hung up on. I mean, right. Everybody should go listen to that. But anyway.
So we're gonna talk about Trump in a minute, I think. But just wrapping up in Florida with DeSantis. And also, I think we're going to talk about Republican strategies looking forward in a minute. But one thing that I think connects all these dots is that in Florida, the Republican governor has targeted critical race theory. He got the Board of Ed in the state to ban the use of the 1619 Project, which is that New York Times Magazine sponsored curriculum about a more a nuanced and granular understanding of the racial history of the country. The racial impact. I'm not doing it justice. But so he's also pushing now as a campaign promise sort of thing, like an aspiration. It's called Stop the Wrongs to Our Kids and Employees Act, or it's the Stop Woke Act. So we know for sure that that's where the direction he's going to be heading as he fights for office again.
More on that in a little bit.
I don't think I've made mistakes. I mean, every time somebody says I made a mistake, they do the polls and my numbers go up. So I guess I haven't made any mistakes.
We showed up and we demonstrated that we would not have our voices silenced by a Republican Party that across the country had a singular intention on suppressing the right to vote.
Some Democratic senators seem to imagine they could just break the rules on a razor-thin majority. Nothing would stand between them and their entire agenda, a new era of fast-track policymaking.
The Republican Party moved very far away from reality. And the fact that you got colleagues of mine in the Senate who refuse even today to acknowledge that Donald Trump lost the election. How do you deal with that?
Joe Biden is the president we need right now. Battle-tested, forward-looking, honest and authentic. He has never forgotten who he is fighting for.
All right, we kind of alluded to this. Is the sun setting on Trump in terms of his political influence? He's facing some interesting legal developments. He's, in court. The lawsuits are being allowed to move forward. His supporters are facing legal troubles. Matt Gaetz, it was reported today that his girlfriend entered the courtroom to testify before a grand jury about the sexual trafficking thing. It's been a year, but it's finally happening. A lot of Marjorie Taylor Greene came really close to advocating using guns against Democrats today. I mean, so his ardent supporters are there's going to be distancing from them. And you have the Southern Democrat, Mike Round, South Dakota Democratic senator. It's like I haven't even heard of this guy, right? He's not that memorable. I mean, he's coming out. He got elected this time, and reelected this last time, and he's like just in an interview saying, "Oh yeah, no, Biden won the election. Of course, Biden won the election," and Trump is calling him a jerk. Basically says, yeah, he takes my endorsement, and now he says he thinks he's got 6 years and doesn't have to worry about it anymore. I'm going to remember this, but this is, I think there's going to be more, a little bit more each time. What more Republicans are going to do this? Romney's keeping count. Romney then responded and talks about each and every Republican who is basically saying that Biden won. And I do think there is a slow movement, and they're hoping to get to a point where the moderates that are running in close elections have permission to be able to say this, so that Trump can tell his supporters, "Oh, go out and turn out for him anyway," because that is the tightrope that they're going to be having to run to be able to get the Trumper votes out there, so that they don't boycott him because they're not taking a firm stand on the big lie, but don't alienate the middle of the road voters and the independent voters who say you're crazy, and be able to focus on the other issues. Is Trump starting, we talked in the last segment about DeSantis rising, possibly being the candidate, and maybe Trump not being the candidate in 2024. Is he starting to lose his hold on the party?
So in terms of I would say there's three ways to answer this. Is Trump losing his hold on the party? One is like just snapshot where we are right now, and it's like there's an argument to be made that he is losing it, but he has not lost it.
Right.
So then the question is like, are we talking about the leadership or are we talking about the base? So the base is the easier one. He's still got about 75% or so support within the base of the party, but people can be fickle, and as evidence comes out, it's possible that we'll slip to a low, the trend, the loss in the trend might influence beyond just the actual raw number, but then that leaves the leadership. And I've seen some consultants speaking about Republican Party leadership, and they're saying like, look, these people, it's about power, and as long as they see how the influence that Trump has, they're going to do what they need to do to hold on or maintain, hold on to what they have or maintain more. I would say he's still the alpha in the room. He's still the party's leader, and I think a lot of Republicans will say that same thing. But I want to look. We'll go back and forth on this because me and you probably both heard the same clips from the Trump interview this morning with Steve Inskeep on NPR. So it was fragments. It wasn't the whole thing.
Right.
But some of the things that he was saying were just pretty off the wall. And I think that he realized that this guy was very well prepared, had evidence, was willing to contradict him. And he just the temperament and the tone. And just when Steve Inskeep pivoted to talking about January 6th, that's when it went down.
Yeah.
I think he realized that was his power move. Basically, it was like, this is all going to go bad. I could blow it all right here. This is just not worth it. So I'll start at the beginning. One of the things that I thought was really interesting was Steve Inskeep said, hey, I've been trying to get you on an interview since 2014. I'm glad you're here today. And Trump kind of sounded like, yeah, in effect, he was basically saying like, yeah, my people protected me from you, but now I need press. So
he said that outright?
No, he didn't say I need press, but he basically said like, hey, I guess they've been protecting me from you, this whole time, basically. But I think that the unstated premise was now that he kind of needed to come out. But then as he went through the voting irregularities from the Stop the Steal, like I said, it was very lawyerly, and he was Steve Inskeep was actually willing to say, okay, well, that's actually not true, and I'm sure Trump's just not used to hearing that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. He's not used to being interviewed by a real reporter. It's just he hasn't had practice.
Yeah. So one of the things that he said was like, hey, look, you go look at all these states that there's all these problems. And Steve Inskeep said, yeah, well, they did actually. And no. And he's like, well, no, he said, there was there wasn't enough ballots in any of the states that were in question to turn any of the states different from what they were. And Trump said, well, the number of ballots don't matter so much. And that's like actually not true. And then he said, well, look, for example, how could it be that more people voted in Detroit? Take a look for yourself. More people voted than there are voters. How could it be in Philly that more people voted than there were voters? Ask yourself. And Steve Inskeep said, well, I did, and they didn't. So it was kind of just like he was out of his element, like you said.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's the best way to say it. I don't know if you had any other observations about some of these.
It was, if you're going to start talking to real reporters, you don't start with NPR. I mean, that's like the gold standard for reporters. That's not who you want to mess around with. Go to somebody else. I mean, there are lightweight reporters that you could probably handle. Go to I'm not going to say who, but I mean there are people that do it. You do not go to somebody like Steve Inskeep. You do not. That's like you might as well be starting with Bob Woodward or something.
Right.
I mean, it's just you're that was not somebody. I'm surprised he stuck with it for 9 minutes. Quite frankly, I mean, I can't wait to hear the whole thing.
Right.
I mean, I'm really just waiting for it. But that was I don't know what was he was thinking. He must not have. Yeah, I don't know who his handlers are now. Who thought that one up? But if you're going to finally wander away from Breitbart and Fox News and the people who fawn for you and throw you softballs.
Newsmax, One American Network.
Yeah, and NPR is not the first place to go. I mean, anyway, it is indicating that he's starting to get desperate, trying to reach other people. I do think the trajectory, he is still in control, he's still in charge, but I do think the trajectory is that he's starting to lose his grip.
Yeah. So a couple final things here, I guess. We have to kind of wrap up this topic. One is he's in a position right now where he sees it slipping away, I would say. Like, for example, Liz Cheney and Dick Cheney on January 6th were maybe the only two Republicans who were, involved in this memorial process, the reflection on what happened on that day. But that's a lane. And when they asked Dick Cheney, what do you have to say about the GOP leadership, not acknowledging this at all? And he said, there's no one in leadership in the GOP right now that resembles any of the leaders that I had in my decade in Congress. And so it was just a moment of gravitas. You could think what you like about Dick Cheney. Everybody's got the full range from all of it, from whatever. But the idea is that there is possibly a new a reversion back to the old, I would say. Maybe not right away, but Liz Cheney is trying to be that person. That's why she's on that committee. So that's one really important thing. And I would say also that truthfully, people see there's enough evidence now coming out with the January 6th committee, and there'll be more, and there'll be more, and there'll be more, and there'll be charges, and there'll be names, and there'll be dates, and there'll be places, and it's going to paint a picture. It's going to be a montage, I think, between now and November, where we see Trump is just going to he's going to be at the middle of that. And it's going to have an impact on the establishment, on the Wall Street, the business roundtable, the Chamber of Commerce. Those Republicans I think are going to break before too long.
All right, and we'll see what effects it has on the midterm campaign as it goes along. Be interesting to see. Okay, that takes us to the next topic. All right, this topic is the midterm campaigns and the weapons of choice for the Republican. They have settled into their strategy at this point. They have a bunch of issues that they could take, but they usually focus on a couple of the things. Way back when, in 1992, the Clinton campaign, the strategy was to remind themselves the economy's stupid. That's usually the issue. Now, the economy isn't all that bad, except for one really key point, and that is inflation. Where what people are paying, and inflation threatens to take away the benefits of all of the raises that people are getting, and all of that is at least on the surface of it. It doesn't really play out that way when you really look at it. If people aren't buying new cars, they're probably not, suffering from inflation as much. And we've discussed that before. The CPI is kind of arbitrary in a lot of ways, and we've discussed that. But this is the weapon of choice for the Republicans. They pretty much stated that inflation and critical race theory are going to be what they're going to hammer the Democrats on, partly because the Democrats don't really have a solid message against it. Now, it's risky in two parts. One is they got to hope that inflation continues right into the election, because if inflation goes into the summer and then fades, nobody remembers by November, if there's no inflation, by that time, nobody's going to remember that they were paying that months earlier. So they really have, they can't say, well, there was inflation. Remember back in April, you were paying all that much, blah, blah, blah. That doesn't doesn't play out that way. Critical race theory, though, is basically a focal point of the culture war, and that always works for Republicans, particularly in midterm elections, which are typically low turnouts for Democratic constituencies. So they have this, and it won it for them in Virginia. And has done it. It's worked for them. Even the fact that probably 90% of Americans don't know what critical race theory is, they think they do, and the Democrats have not put together an effective message about critical race theory. They don't know whether to defend it or to counterattack or what. They do not have an effective message on critical race theory. They do not have a strategy to deal with it, or if they do, it's not working, whatever it is. So that is something that they're going to use. And and it seems like the main worry that the Republicans have, as we've discussed, is whether or not their attack is going to be diluted if Trump forces the issue with a big lie. If they got to dilute it with that, then they're going to have a problem. But if they can stay focused on inflation, and inflation lasts into the fall, and they've got critical race theory, they've got a 1-2 punch there that could help them retake Congress, along with the advantages they have, the structural advantages and the historic advantages of being the first midterm election. What do you think?
Yeah, so these are two incredibly complicated issues, and I agree with your premise that these are going to be that it's published elsewhere too, but that these are hot button strategic issues that Republicans think they can get a lot of traction on. So I think maybe we'll talk about them both separately. First, we'll talk about inflation. It's a little more technical, and I'll get your feedback on what I say. But depending on the economist that you look at, or get believe that they're accurate, like two important things here. One is that approximately 60%, so they say, of the inflation is really just corporations and supply side raising prices because demand is high. And because of COVID, because the economy slowed down and people were laid off and not working, and trucks and ships and trains were halted, year over year, we're seeing huge percentage increases because there's a scarcity and there's a demand. And so that's just, that's like gravity. Like that's what happens. So if you have pricing power, you take advantage of your pricing power, which is why we see record corporate profits in many, many cases. So that's one element to this, is that there was an inevitability of some inflation, but corporate interests were able to, bang up the prices in a big way. So that's one piece of it. And then another piece of it that the Republicans are saying is, well, Biden is just a bad leader. He's not leading through this economy, through this inflation the way that he should. But what is actually, what are they talking about? Like what is there some huge amount of money that's getting put in people's hands that wasn't happening before? And the answer is no. People, generally speaking, your average, working class folk that makes, the median wage is about $60,000 per household. That's not where the money's going. The vast majority of the money is going very high up the food chain, and these people are reintroducing it into investable assets like the stock market, et cetera, housing. So we're seeing incredible inflation in places where people are making investments, and so. Another piece of this too is, like what would you have? There's monetary policy and there's fiscal policy. So if the fiscal policy is to spend a little bit more, like Build Back Better, $150 billion, it's a small amount of money in an $18 trillion economy. But so there's the monetary policy side of the house, and I think the Federal Reserve is on board now. Finally, the Federal Reserve has said we're going to do 4 interest rate hikes in 2022, a quarter in March, a quarter in June, a quarter in September, a quarter in December, signaling to the markets, signaling to all the people with all that, billions and trillions of dollars sitting around, there's going to be a change. So there's been some leadership behind the curtain. And so the question is, are people going to say, well, my gas is more expensive, my food's more expensive, and I'm just pissed off at the president for that? Or could the Democrats make the case that they're doing what they can do?
Yeah, well, and the problem is inflation is rarely a president's fault, but it often gets blamed on the president. That's just the way it is. This is global. I mean, a lot of it too. So we'll see. But the Republicans are kind of taking a chance too, because inflation could be ease off. I mean, they got a real problem there. Right now, there's still a lot of stuff backed up at the Los Angeles port, the biggest port, and the rest, and the ships are still there. But that stuff can start moving, and that could have a big impact on it. I mean, there's just a whole bunch of stuff. One of the things that could start having, anyway, there's a number of other things that could provide relief. The Fed is talking about upping interest rates. That could slow the economy down as well. That could have negative effects if they don't do it right, and the rest. But and then they could pivot and blame further recession on it, or stagflation, or whatever on it. But which is what happened in the late 70s, and that brought Carter down. But it's they're taking a real chance, because if they go in there screaming about inflation, and you don't have inflation next November, and there is a reasonable chance that there won't be. So anyway, I mean, you've got a lot, and so the Democrats, really have to counter hit on it. But rather than trying to, the problem is that the Democrats, when you've got to use a lot of words to explain things, when you got to use a lot of words to explain what inflation is, when you use a lot of words to explain what critical race theory is.
Well, that's where I was going to go next. Yeah,
go ahead. We only have a little bit left. So
go ahead. We've talked about this a lot. We've talked about critical race theory a lot, but it's nuanced. So one of the things that came out of Virginia race for governor, when you talk to people, I've heard Matt Taibbi talked about it. He went down there and asked people after the election, before the election and after the election. It's really a lot about local control. And people don't want elites on the coast from the Ivy League tower to tell them, how they're going to teach their kids, and certainly not to offend or diminish the greatness of American history that they remember and that they believe and feel, because America's the preeminent country in the world. So it's really about tact. And this one I'm kind of blaming the Democrats for not articulating the openness, the melting pot, America as the melting pot, the idea that we blend our ideas, we emerge as a more perfect union, that whole thing. It instead, much of the Democratic policies are geared towards, like in theory, we're talking about dignity, we're talking about, justice and equality and belonging and all the things that we all believe in, we all support. But the question is, do you let the Republicans frame that debate in a way that is saying, we know better than you, we're going to put you down, we're going to ... So the Democrats, I believe, just need to fine tune the messaging about the inclusion aspect of why you ought not call it critical race theory.
You also have to acknowledge when there are things that are kind of messed up, like you don't explain to 8-year-old kids that there's a problem with whiteness. 8-year-old kids don't understand that term. You don't use that term. In college, maybe you can talk about the context, but we're out of time on that subject.
I, Richard Billhouse Nixon, do solemnly swear.
I, Gerald R. Ford, do solemnly swear.
I, Jimmy Carter, do solemnly swear.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear.
I, George Herbert Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
I, William Jefferson Clinton, do solemnly swear.
I, George Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
I, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., do solemnly swear. So help me God.
All right, last topic, going on to our ongoing reports about redistricting. We're going to report on 3 states. More and more states are finishing up their redistricting maps. I'm going to get right into it. I'm going to start with the easiest one. New Mexico has officially finished its map. There will be a lawsuit. If you take a look, if you're watching television, you'll get to see us on television. You get to see the map. You can take a look at the old map, and you can take a look at the new map. If you're on the radio, listen to us on the radio, you can go to the 538 site, and the right-hand column, you can see find their interactive map and go straight to New Mexico. Actually, you can look at all the maps. It's really helpful. And if you look at the old map, you'll see that the lower half of the state is red, represented by Yvette Harrell, Republican, plus 14, very heavily, well, maybe not that heavily, but pretty heavily Republican district. The Democrats didn't have to do a whole lot of gerrymandering to make it very difficult for her to win re-election. They've made it a very competitive district. It actually leans Democrat. They're taking a little bit of a chance because up on top, they're making Teresa Leger Fernandez, her district, a little bit more competitive, but they're going all out. They want all three districts to become Democrats, and they're going to run heavy to make that happen. The New Mexico 2nd District has actually been Democrat before, and they want that to happen. Republicans are threatening to sue, but I don't think they're going to win there because there's no racial component to it. Any comments, David?
The only thing I would add on this one is that 538 has an efficiency gap where they're able to figure out how much of your voting majority you're able to squeeze out on how you draw the districts. In the past, the state was one Republican, one up for grabs, and one Democrat. Now it's one solid Democrat, two up for grabs. So it's like plus 39.3, which is like fourfold more efficient of allocation of voters from the perspective of Democrats. So if you were, trying to draw it in a more democratic way, then they were able to accomplish that.
Yeah, and it's going to be hard for a lawsuit to say, hey, you made all the races more competitive than they were before. That's not fair. They're going to have a real hard time. I think the Republican lawsuit is going to be dismissed out of hand, even by conservative courts.
And the racial splits are even, very close to even. So that's and fair across all three, to be fair.
Yeah. All right, we're going to move immediately west to Arizona. Ironically, this is supposed to be a neutral commission doing this, but it came out with a map that the Democrats are screaming about. They are looking to lose 2 seats out of this, and it just absolutely kills them. The Democrats had come up with an incredible upset a few years back. Tom O'Halloran had taken one with really good turnouts from the Apache and Navajo counties, and won in what had been in an old map a Republican-leaning district. For some reason, under the new map, he is now in what is the name, Gosar, Paul Gosar, famous for the video killing Ocasio-Cortez. He now shares that, and it's a very heavy Republican-leaning district, and he is going to run and try to win, but it's going to be very tough for him to win. Not only that, Ann Kirkpatrick, who's retiring anyway, but her Tucson district, which also covers the southeast corner of the state, went from being a slightly Democratic leaning margin to not a heavy Republican, but a Republican leaning district. Raul Grijalva becomes even more Democratic, and Ruben Gallego is basically his Phoenix-based one becomes even more heavily Democratic. And Greg Stanton, well, he's in a tough district, but it looks like it's going to be pretty much 2 more Republicans, and maybe 3 Democrats will be elected. And this was just the luck of the draw, because the neutral commissioner went ahead and supported this map, even though it really looks like a Republican gerrymander. Democrats are mystified, and they are going to file a lawsuit because the Latinos for fair redistricting are saying this might as well have been just a Jim Crow job. It splits their communities, and they are suing on the basis of a division of their communities. It does not support them at all, and we'll see what happens. Dave?
Yeah, so I don't know much about the commission's rule set that they followed, but we here in California, we have a commission that, the exact terminology, but it's communities of interest, right? Is that what is that the guiding principle?
Yes.
So that would be the threshold that I think a fair nonpartisan commission would need to try to uphold. And apparently, from what I've read, that the main debate in this in Arizona was about how to deal with Tucson and the surrounding area, and that the Democrats kind of clung to some kind of small victory there. But when you look at the map, I don't see it as a victory at all. So I mean, I'm not really sure exactly what happened, but to be honest, it doesn't look like it was treated in the same community of interest way that our standard here is in California.
No, it is amazing, and like I said, this will probably be the only one of the few lawsuits that are filed against a neutral commission job. I mean, I just, it's amazing. And what happened is there's 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans on it, and then a neutral commissioner decides, and she just voted for the Republican proposal. There wasn't a whole lot of compromise. Nobody knows what she was thinking, but it definitely benefits the Republicans. There was only one highly competitive seat on the map. So it didn't increase the competition in any way. Anyway, there's more to be said about this, but the Latino communities are livid about this map, and that is the criteria for it. So more to be said about Arizona, and that is a growing state. So, that's an unusual state that is in transition. Of course, that's, a flip state that flipped for Biden. That's where Sinema's from. A lot of unusual politics there. So we'll see. All right. And then the other state I want to discuss is Michigan. Also has a neutral commission. Ironically, even though it's benefiting the Democrats, the new map, it is being sued by civil rights groups because it actually took apart two Detroit-based Black majority districts. And so it is being sued because it is basically watering down Black influence, even though it is increasing potentially the Democratic difference. The old map basically had a lot more Republican majority districts or Republican leaning. Well, not a lot more. Michigan is one of those states that actually lost, not because of a decline in population, but decline relative to other growing states. And it looks like there, in the new map, there'll be more competitive districts and one less Republican district. For instance, if this map holds, the Democrats are hoping to contest Peter Mayor over in the Grand Rapids area there, which has become a very competitive district. But over in the Detroit area, a couple of Black incumbents have been put into the same districts, and one of them is actually retiring, and there's going to be lawsuits about that. The Flint one has actually become more competitive, and Lansing as well. But complaints from Black groups, even though African American groups, even though the Democrats benefit. Dave.
What kind of stands out, I would say, is that the urban areas, not including Detroit, Flint, Lansing, Grand Rapids, they're all competitive. And so that means that there's 3 competitive districts now instead of just 2. And so that's at least one thing in their favor. It seems to me, like you said, the lawsuit would be about how they handled Metro Detroit. But Metro Detroit has got 3 solid Democratic districts plus a Democratic leaning district. So I'm not 100% sure how that will play out. That lawsuit is being implemented by those folks in Detroit. So it doesn't seem to be that they lost much ground in that area
politically. But in terms of African American representation, and that's what it's based on. Lawsuits already been filed. So anyway, we'll have more to talk about in the future, but that concludes that segment. All right, that brings us to our prediction segment. Dave, what do you got?
Well, I'm going to follow up on my prediction from last week only because now it's upon us. Starting tomorrow and in through the weekend, the Congress, both houses, both chambers, the House and the Senate, are going to try to make a huge national issue over the civil rights legislation that we talked about earlier in the show, voting rights and the access to polls and ultimately representation, what it means to be democratic. So my prediction is that this will be a wash in the sense that both sides are going to claim victory. Which I don't see how that's actually going to work out, but I think that they're going to do it. The Democrats are going to make a stand, probably not get what they want, unfortunately, and so Democrats are going to say, "See, we put Manchin in the hot seat and Sinema in the hot seat, and they just proved that they're not acting in good faith. They're not good faith actors." And so that's kind of where I think we're going to be at the end of this week, because there's no real urgency to pass this legislation on Monday.
Well, my prediction is also about Manchin, President Manchin, as some people call him. I think that the 7% inflation rate is pretty much the final death on Build Back Better. There will not be a comprehensive Build Back Better bill passed this time around. Manchin is going to use that as an excuse against it. Maybe some of the component bills, portions will be passed. He's talked about maybe even allowing some of the alternative energy, tax incentive things to go through, as long as it doesn't, affect coal and oil too badly or whatever. I mean, he's open to some of that. But I think the child tax credit is dead for now until the Democrats have a solid majority. Actually, their child tax credit could actually be revived because Romney actually had a plan for it. They could talk to Republicans in the future if they could ever get back to any kind of bipartisanship. But Manchin and Sinema are just not going to allow it to happen. And that 7% report today is pretty much the death of it. All right, well, that's it for today. We will be back to see what happened to the voting rights bills next week. Until then, stay informed and stay engaged.